Welcome back, inspired ladies. We hope that you have been enjoying these episodes so far this year. It's our desire that through these conversations, you find the importance of knowing you are designed by an artistic creator, discover what his will is for your life, and that you dwell with him as you go through life. We've touched on some great topics so far, and for this episode, we talk about a topic that all of us can relate to, being a woman. We reach far back into history and talk about the stereotypical roles that women have played, and then we dive into what the role of women looks like now. We live in a pretty exciting time in history as we've seen females serve in political capacities, hold top positions in large companies, and lead thousands of people to Jesus from a stage. We talk about how freeing it is to see these changes, but we also discuss the dark sides of the pressure to be something great and extraordinary. If you find yourself in this tension, this episode is just for you. We hear from a woman in full-time ministry, a woman working in the education field with teenage students, and a stay-at-home mom. You're sure to gather all kinds of different insights. Welcome back.
Hello, hello. We're here again.
Again, and again. This season is actually a lot longer than our last season already.
Yeah.
I think. I mean, we are into several episodes into this season, and we've had a lot of fun talking about New Year's goals.
Yep.
I think we got more feedback on the people that are the to-do list people than the people that were not the to-do list people.
Yeah.
So it's because we don't need to say that because we already know that we're correct.
The to-do list people probably put it on their to-do list to reach out and give feedback.
Yes.
So
You're probably right about that.
But my heart goes out to you.
Yeah, but I had feedback from somebody who said they were so glad I talked about sticky notes. Because they are the same way. So I feel vindicated.
Well, you have a sticky note
I
right
do have
in
a
front
sticky
of
note
you,
right here on the
but
table.
But here's the thing. We talked about how yellow was really boring, and you still have yellow sticky notes.
That's what we have here. So I just need to get some colors.
You know what? I'm gonna get that for you. I have even gone on a rabbit trail on Etsy looking for like really fun colors of Post-it notes outside of like the neons or whatever. I've definitely looked up like muted colors.
Ooh, that sounds nice.
I did find some, but I didn't buy any. But.
Yeah.
And we've also talked about parenting. Ooh, that was fun.
Yeah, that was a good one.
Yes, it is.
If you or someone you know is a parent, be sure to share that episode. It was great. We broke it down into 2 episodes because there was a lot to talk about, and we did not really brush the surface on everything there is to talk about parenting. I know it's a huge subject to tackle. We could fill seasons and seasons of just talking about parenting, but hopefully listening to those episodes gave you a light at the end of the tunnel, maybe a hook of hope to hold on to in some of the most trying days of your life. I mean, because some of the most enjoyable and joyful times and also some of the hardest times have stemmed from the one subject of parenting for me.
I hope so too, that anyone who was listening maybe was also encouraged that they were probably doing better than they think they are.
Yes.
Yeah.
That is so true. And if you don't believe us, maybe pull out your phone or your Facebook timeline or whatever and go back and look at pictures, videos, status updates when your kids might have been little, and you can see, I mean, I have done that before, is like look back at pictures and be like, oh, I was an engaged mom. Like when I start to believe the lie that I'm not, you know? So, but anyway, we're moving along, and we told you at the beginning of this season that we were going to talk about spicy things, not just for the sole sake of pushing people's buttons, but because we live in a world where we're constantly faced with very heated arguments and debates over anything. It does. I mean, True. It can be about my left toenail. We can strike up an argument about that.
I do not want to see your left toenail.
It's not painted right now because my toenails are resting for winter. Do any of y'all do that?
No. What? I think mine rest year round because
You don't ever paint your toenails?
No.
Ew.
I can't do it. And I can't get pedicures because I'm so ticklish. And they know it and they think it's funny.
I don't get pedicures because I'm afraid I'm going to get some sort of fungus.
Fungus among us.
Yeah. Anyways, more.
All right.
Not more about toenails. So we thought we would drop the big bomb of talking about the role of women.
Dun, dun, dun. Yes.
Did you like my bomb sound effect?
That's pretty weird.
Wait, side note, didn't you do a TikTok of you make you do a sound and then you have to imitate it with your mouth or a sound from your...
So Jordan, my fiance, and I made a TikTok of making random noises. He sprayed Pam cooking spray and then the other person has to imitate the noise. And it is the funniest thing. It's just take 5 minutes and do it. It's so funny.
Did you go viral?
I don't know. I haven't checked. But it's at JJ Greb on TikTok.
Check it out.
Yeah, check it out. There's a lot of them, but I'm partial to ours because I just thought it was so funny.
Well, I'm not very good at making bomb sounds, but there it is. It's out on the table. Mm-hmm. The role of women. Yeah. What do you... I'm literally just going to leave it there, and I'm going to ask you two to chime in. How does it hit you? Does it make you cringe, or does it give you this wind in your sails that I'm going to tell everybody what I think about the role of women, or does it kind of make you scared?
I'm kind of scared.
Well, I guess since I'm the one that kind of suggested the topic that
Janice, it's Janice's fault. If you have a problem, report to Janice.
Oh my gosh. And maybe that's just because of some of the eras that I've lived through. I graduated from college in the late 70s, and I remember at the time that, first off, I was a young married, which everyone was absolutely abhorred that I had gotten married. But I made it clear that I really wanted to start a family, and not just my friends, but my professors and such.
What kind of college did you go to?
Small private college.
Oh,
yeah, music conservatory.
Okay.
So I had a teaching degree, so it was you need to do this, and this was in a time and place where if you interviewed for a teaching position and you were married, that they were allowed to ask you if you were planning on having kids. Which a lot of things that you're not allowed to ask anymore.
Yeah.
You were allowed to ask back then, and I remember, and if you were unmarried, they would ask, well, do you have a serious boyfriend? Are you planning on getting married? So all these women were lying, no matter what, because they they wanted to get a job. So obviously that can't happen anymore, which is good. But I kind of had both things at that time. It was I want to have kids, I want to start a family, and that wasn't really a supported role or a valued role at that point. As a woman. It was, you were supposed to go out and have a career. You don't need a man. You just need to do your what you studied for. You need to build that up and be independent, and you definitely don't need to have kids.
Yeah.
And what years were these?
Like the late 70s, early 80s. And then, and I went through a thing when I was in college. I worked on vacations, summer vacations at JCPenney, and I got paid less per hour because I was female than I did for the guys who were just doing the same, simple job, running the cash register or something, And it wasn't until a number of years later that apparently someone filed a class action suit, and I got this check for some piddly amount of money, but it was the difference of what they owed me,
Yeah.
So, I guess part of my roots is I feel that stuff because some of that
because you have been discriminated against.
I felt that, but I think there's still a pressure on women on who in the world is defining our role.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
And I think culture has a huge part in it. And I think, therefore, women feel a pressure to conform. Or if you're not, then you're not going to get supported. And, Megan, since you're younger
Yeah.
and, just been out of college a short time and things like that. What do you see right now? Because, that's what my experience was as I was getting out of college.
Yeah, so I think that there are, in culture today, I think there are several parallels with that time period. I think that there is, there's still an expectation for women to not just succumb to what society expects them to do, which I think that expectation of women to be mothers and stay home with children and raise up the family, do the laundry, whatever the case may be, I think that there's still a stigma around that. And I think that today as women, we almost push those desires out of our hearts because there's a stigma around it. And so I think that today, I think that those desires, if that's something you desire for your life, I think that is absolutely valid. My sister is a stay-at-home mom, and she went through nursing school, and I could never picture her as anything other than the caregiver to her children. And I know that she was placed on this earth to do just that, and she does it so well. And I think that today in culture, no matter what the desires of your heart are, there's going to be an extreme side that tries to talk you out of them.
Yeah.
There's a side that says, well, if you want to do this as a woman, just remember that you're going to face these obstacles. I'll never forget, I used to work in the medical field, and one of my goals was to become a doctor. And before anyone asked, why do you want to do that? Or what makes you want to go into healthcare? It was always, well, it's going to be really hard for you to raise a family. It's that balance is going to be so tough. So just make sure you think about that. And I'm here at 13 years old. And I'm like, okay, I'll think about it. I'll weigh my options. And I think that, whereas if I had sat there and said, I really have a desire in my heart to get married and have children and raise up a family and send them out into the world, and there would still be someone who would not be okay with that. And so I think that today in culture, from what I've experienced, the vast majority of opinion is if you're not doing something with your life, then you're not fulfilling your role as a woman. You almost have to push the desires of your heart, like parenting and staying home. You almost have to push those out of the way to make room for what culture has decided is your role as a woman.
Yeah.
If you're not forging forward and making a name for yourself and living life how you want to in those ways, then you're doing something wrong as a woman.
I'm a stay-at-home mom, and I've had jobs here and there. I worked full-time until I had kids. And then after I had kids, I went very part-time. And then after that, just the following years, I would just dabble in doing contract work from my home while I had my kids, or I would be able to take them over to my mom's for a few days a week in order to work. But really my desire was that I would be able to stay home with my kids. And I think a lot of what shaped that was not my faith upbringing, but really just what was modeled for me, because my mom was a stay-at-home mom and my husband's mom was a stay-at-home mom with young kids. They began working once we got into our middle school and high school years. So I think that was what I knew. And so a lot of me, I was a recipient of the benefits of being a child who had a stay-at-home mom. And I valued the things that I was given, time and affection around the clock, and empowered to be able to put my mind to things and accomplish tasks. And so I think I was a recipient of that, and I wanted that for my kids as well. But I struggled. There was an inner tension in me because my dad wanted me to go to college, which I totally support. Go to college, whatever. It was very important to my dad that I went to college. And in my mind, I'm like, well, I can't major in mothering, because that was my desire.
Yeah.
And he kept telling me, well, you have to get a degree. And I appreciate that he pushed me because I needed a plan B.
Yeah.
And I knew that out of the love of his heart, he wanted the best for me. And he probably knew subconsciously that a way that I'm going to make a name for myself is if I get a degree. Because being a woman, he wanted me to go to school and get a degree. And so I did. And I was still like, okay, well, I'm just going to get a job until I have kids. Mm-hmm. And I was able to do that. But now it's interesting when someone, and this is very telling of our culture and what we place importance on, because what is one of the first questions that you ask someone that you're meeting for the first time?
What do you do?
What do you do?
Mm-hmm.
Which puts all the emphasis on, instead of, it's about what I can do and how I can perform instead of who I'm becoming and who I am at my core. Mm-hmm. And so it's very threatening to me. And this is probably this is something that I'm still wrestling with. It's hard for me to be 100% confident of I'm a stay-at-home mom. Yeah. And that's what I've chosen. That's what I've sacrificed. I've sacrificed having a job to be able to do that. And I love every bit of it. It's not easy. I love it. I love getting to do what I do. I just knew that I wanted to do that. It's really hard for me to say that to a person who has status.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Like they're a, XYZ of this company, or they're this director of this, or they've, been in school for 10 years to get this degree to be able to do this, because it sounds like measly and just like, I'm a stay-at-home mom.
And I think it's so interesting, too, in response to that question, if you were to say, well, I'm a mom, that creates some unrest within you, because you're almost like, well, I don't know how they're going to receive that.
Yeah.
And then if you're a mother and you're also later on or during or before, and you go into a career where you become the director of ABC company, you're like, well, I'm the director of ABC company and I'm a mom. And so that the whole pretense of that completely changes, because it's like, and I'm a mom and I'm proud of that. Mm-hmm. Whereas without that title before, I think that role that you took on as a mom, like, loses a little bit of value in conversation.
This is a complete lie from the enemy, is I feel like it's not enough.
Yeah.
Well, don't you think that that's from the very beginning, the lie that the enemy tried to hand us, that we were not enough? Mm-hmm. You need to take that fruit and eat the fruit from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, because you're not enough. You need to be like God.
Yeah.
And I feel like we are really susceptible to that. I mean, I'm listening to the two of you talk about the whole motherhood piece and being a stay-at-home mom, and I was for the years that, or basically I was for a number of time for when my kids were little, and I remember though looking at women who were working in the marketplace and feeling the exact same thing that you're describing, and feeling less than.
Yeah,
and while you were talking, I'm thinking, why do we feel that way if that is what we feel that God has asked us to do, or where we find our fulfillment even to do that? Why do we persist in saying, I'm less than, when you're not? Because that is such an important thing to be doing with your life. And but that is the way it is. I was a stay-at-home mom for 14 years, because my oldest was 14 when I got divorced, and I had to find a full-time job because I was then the sole support of our family, and it was awful.
I'm sure.
It was awful, because in my mind, I wanted to be with my kids, and they were at 14, 12, and 10.
Yeah.
And so it was, we were in that age of, they're really starting to go out and being with their friends more and stuff like that. And I'm like, I'm not going to be there. It was very, very
probably had
hard.
some level of mom guilt.
Oh, I hate to tell you guys, my kids are all grown. I still have mom guilt. Okay, so it doesn't go away. I'm so sorry, everyone. But as long as you will be a mother forever, once you have a child, you are a mother forever. and the mom guilt never goes away. But
That's very encouraging.
yeah, no problem. Anytime. I'll
Anytime.
But I remember the first summer that I had to work full time. It was awful because I loved the summertime because I loved being with my kids and, you know, just having that freedom and not having the school
no
schedule
schedules.
and all that. Yeah. And there I was still getting up and going to work and everything. And that was awful because, yes, I did feel incredibly guilty that my job made me late for this, or I couldn't be at this baseball practice and someone else had to get my sons there and then I could run in afterwards or something like that. And that was really hard. I mean, I built a successful career in the medical field, but it was, to me, that was part of what I did. And I loved doing what I did, but it was also just, I guess, like a piece. It wasn't my identity.
Yeah.
You know, to say, oh, I'm this and I work in this medical office and I do this and this. That was not ever my identity. My identity was always, to me, the most important thing was that I was my kid's mom. You know, first off, I'm a daughter of Jesus, but that was the first thing for me because that's really what I wanted. I had a stay-at-home mom too, and actually when I grew up, that was actually what you saw in media on TV. You know, it was all the, especially though it was the moms who, you know, were always dressed up and wore heels and pearls and had perfect hair and all this.
Vacuuming when their husband got
right,
home.
Right, vacuuming the
had dinner
perfect
in the
house.
oven.
And, okay, come in, dear, you know, and let me get you the newspaper and your pipe. And your slippers.
I do like vacuuming though.
And laundry.
Yeah.
You know, but as a single mom, that was hard. And you know, if you're a single mom, I know it's hard. I know it's really hard, and you're balancing so many things all at one time, and you feel like it's all on your shoulders. And there's no other way to say it other than that is a very hard thing. But I can tell you that you're going to be okay, and you find some other single moms that you can link up with, and you know, I hope that all of you are part of a church that supports single moms and is there. You know, don't be afraid to ask for help. It's hard because you get to the place, depending on why you're single, but for me, it was coming out of a bad marriage, and it was like I was determined I was going to be that woman who was not going to need help and not going to need a man and not going to need any of that because I was like done.
Yeah.
And it's easy to get really hard that way, but if you're in a good community, you can ask for help.
Yeah. Well, I think back of even like when we broach this subject, I think of just the role of women from the beginning. I mean, and how that's changed over time and what our expectations are. I mean, because there's no doubt that we have lived for centuries in a patriarchal society. I mean, there really is no other time in history where women have ruled the world, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's been queens and empresses and things like that, but in general, a large part, we live in a patriarchal society. So my question is, you know, we just sat, all three of us here just sat and said, you know, you have a desire to be a mom one day.
Yeah.
Both you and I, Janice, are moms. What's to be said about the woman who has no desire to sit down and start a family, and that just might not be, you know, where they are in life or where they want to go in life? And, you know, I think actually the church in general has done a lot to form some of the gender roles.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Janice, I think that you've been a part of a church longer than we have. Do you have any insight into this?
To talk right now.
Oh yeah. I agree. I do see that, and I have seen that. I've not been someone who's like hopped from church to church. Wherever I've gone, I've kind of planted myself and stayed. So, but the churches that I've been in the past, in many ways, it's it's not just the patriarchal, but almost paternalizing, where you have, it's like, pat the woman on the head and say, don't you just worry about that. That's too hard for your brain. Okay. Kind of thing. And, which is not good.
Ugh.
Because my brain works just as well as anybody's, and it doesn't mean just because I'm female that my brain doesn't work.
Why do you think that the church has done that in the past?
I think some of it is there's certain scriptures that I think that have been taken maybe in a certain way, out of a cultural context, out of different ways, and looked at and said, oh, well, this is it. Eve was deceived, and so therefore women are
she's
somehow
dumb.
She's deceived, or somehow there's just this weakness and they're flawed and all this. But when you get right down to it, Adam knew better, and he stood there and did it anyway. So, so I think that's part of it, and just
I think also God, addressed as God the Father, probably also has some to do with it.
If you look at it that elevates the male gender, I think then yes, it probably would. But if you look at it always have looked at it as he's just we all need a good father, whether we're male or female.
Yeah, you're right.
And so to me that's never been an issue. But I think that there have been some trains of thought in the church where it's that men are they're just better in some ways, that their roles and all that are more valued and more important, and they are just for them, and women aren't supposed to do these things and stuff like that. And I've definitely run into that. I was, I alluded to the fact that I'd been married before, and I had the marriage was abusive, and the church that I was in in that frame of mind that no matter what, you stay married. And I didn't get married with the thought that I was going to get divorced. That was never, ever in my mind.
Right.
But number one, it became dangerous, and there was a lot of really bad things that were going on. I had kids, and but the emphasis always was, if you are just quiet and submissive and pray. Just pray. He will change. And to me, the danger is then that the institution of marriage was more valued than I was. As a child of God, as a daughter of God, that it was like, no, we don't want to have that statistic, that we have this divorce here. And to the place even that it just made people really uncomfortable when I did get divorced. It's like, we don't know what to do with you because you're divorced, and you should be married, and what's wrong with you? There was a time period where I just stayed away from certain Christian gatherings because I couldn't handle the judgment, of just people turning away, and it was like I had no testimony anymore. I had no voice anymore because I did that, and I didn't, stay in my marriage. But I knew that what I was doing was exactly the right thing to do. I know for myself that if I had stayed there, I probably would have committed suicide. I was so depressed, and even having kids would not have been enough because I was so convinced in my mind they would be better off without me.
Wow.
And God didn't want me to have that. And it took a lot of years after that, not only for him to get into my heart and my mind and heal me of all those things, but also just to put in me that sense of that I'm created in his image and I have value, and that, that I am a pearl of great price, and that he would, sell everything, and he did. He gave it all for me, and not in just a general sense, but for me personally. And I remember one day looking in the mirror, and it's the weirdest experience, but I looked in the mirror and I didn't recognize myself. I was like, who is that? It was like I saw myself for the first time.
Yeah.
And I grabbed my journal, and I'm like, Lord, what are you doing? And it was like, just write down what you see. And so I started writing things down, of what I saw. and what I was seeing inside. And it was like the first time in who knows how long that I really was able to start getting a grasp on who God created me to be.
Mm-hmm.
And which was pretty amazing. And that and it was like several days in a row. Every time I'd look in the mirror, I was like, whoa, who the heck is that?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
A new creation.
Mm-hmm.
It's really interesting that once you, for a long time we can be blinded and deaf to God's proclamation over us because someone or something is those are like the voice is louder. And when you have a spouse that tells you lies year after year, of course you start believing them.
Well, and also too, when you're in a faith environment where they're saying that he has more authority than you do, then his word is more weighty than yours, and you're to submit to that. It's or you could have a spouse like I did who knew scripture and would just use that, and so it's really easy to get so confused and say, well, that has to be right.
Yeah.
Even when it's not.
Yeah.
And I was fortunate enough to find a really good Christian counselor that just started challenging some of those beliefs.
That's good.
And that was probably the turning point. It was like, oh, the light started to come on and saying, oh, guess this is not right. This is not good. And even though I didn't have the support of my pastor at that time, I did, file for divorce, and he was not happy about it. I was removed from ministry and stuff like that because I was leading worship, and I was told I was not fit to be on the platform, and that I could come and I could be in church, but I had to sit and be quiet, but I could come, and that was just the atmosphere at that time. I'm sure there's still churches that would do that. I don't know that they, I know he's retired now, that he would do that now, but at that point, that was just the way it was. I'll never forget sitting in front of an all-male elder board.
It's getting my blood boiling.
Well, and I think that, I can't remember, I think it was the episode that we talked about singleness, where I kind of threw out the devil's advocate question of, is marriage really the goal? And I think that sometimes in church, we've made marriage the goal. And which I think has also played into the factor of how the church thinks the family should operate. Now, I'm saying this by not trying to tell anybody that having a family and being a mom is exactly what you should do, and if you don't have that desire, then you're wrong. I think that God definitely designed male and female different, with different characteristics and qualities and all that. And then when you do come together in a family unit, I think that he lays out a structure to us that he's written in his word that shows us how things can be done. And maybe the best way, not the only way, but maybe the best way. But I have several single friends who marriage and having kids really isn't on their radar. And so my question to that is it wrong for, we've sat here talking about how we love our kids and, in marriage and what's our role within that. But to be a single woman and to be empowered to do what you want to do is not bad.
No, not at all.
And it's not bad to not have the desire to be married or be in a family unit, because I think it's really clear, Paul, in the Bible says that he's not called to marriage. He's called to singleness.
Right.
And so I think that when you find yourself in a conversation where people are saying that the role of women is, a woman is to be at home and to provide for their family or whatever, I just don't think that that's 100% true.
Well, and I think that a lot of it comes down to the fact that God places desires in your heart to lead you towards his plan for your life. And Janice, you mentioned, just looking in the mirror one day and just saying, like, who is that? Who am I? And I think that, at least in my experience, I went through I'm still in my early 20s, but in my like earliest 20s, fresh out of college, getting ready to figure out, what do I want to do? I just realized, like, who am I? Like, what is this foundation that I'm basing my career on?
Mm-hmm.
What foundation am I basing these life-altering decisions on? And at the time, I didn't want kids. I wanted to work, and I wanted to, like, I was working 60-hour weeks, and I was perfectly fine with it. I didn't feel like
Living
I was
your best life.
missing anything. I didn't feel like I was longing for anything more. Like, to me, that was my life, and
That
that's
was
what
what
I
you wanted.
wanted. And it wasn't until I had an encounter with Christ, and I built my foundation through Him, and I just said, lay on my heart the desires that you have for my life, and allow those to become my desires.
Mm-hmm. I love that.
And that was when I had a desire to have a family. And I think that the desires that God chooses to lay on our hearts are specific to each and every one of us, just as each and every one of us are specific in how He created us. And so I don't agree with a blanket statement that, the goal is marriage, or the goal is fulfilling this list of attributes of a woman. I think that so long as we are in synchrony with God and talking to Him and requesting His presence and requesting His guidance, I think that He will place desires on our heart that directly point us towards where He wants us to go.
Yeah. I love that you said that, because I think that where it becomes a problem with this women in roles is, and I have met a few people in my life like this, where it becomes more, the goal becomes more of sticking it to the man
Yeah. Yep.
than being humble in just your walk of life. I think that's where, feminism is, there's great things to know about feminism, and there's nothing wrong with being a feminist. I think where it gets wrong is where we choose to make it a big deal and say, like, well, you're just doing that, or you're being like that because you hate females.
Yeah.
You're smiling because I think that
There's a lot. There's just, it's
female empowerment.
yes.
And I'm not saying that it's bad, because let's go back to women in the church, roles of women in the church. Historically, and even now, there are several congregations now that still will not let a woman be a pastor. That's more common than we actually probably want to admit.
Right.
And they have their reasons. They have their doctrine, they have their reasons. But something like that, like, I wouldn't classify myself as a feminist, but something like that makes my blood boil.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to pretend like I know all of the points of being a feminist and where exactly they play a role in the church, because I'm still on a journey and I'm figuring that out. But what I do know is, and what I can encourage you if you're listening, is that it doesn't matter where you are in a church pew or a church chair, volunteering in maybe a kids ministry, speaking on a podcast, having a conversation in the lobby, you can still relay God's truth and promises to someone else.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah. And I know that what you were saying is, it's true that there are, groups of churches and congregations and things like that really hang on to their doctrine of just saying that, there's, women shouldn't teach, and women, shouldn't preach and shouldn't be pastors and all this kind of thing. And they base it on some scriptures. And I guess my thought was, I remember, of course, I became a Christian when I was in college, and being in churches like that, and then I would read scriptures. You know, one of my favorites is when they talk about you talk about people like Lydia, and you talk about Deborah. You talk about Paul and how he used women, and let's get right down to it. How Jesus looked at women.
Mm-hmm.
He was
Who was the first one that showed up at the grave?
Right. I mean, and he was constantly valuing and lifting up women in a culture that was even more difficult than what we live in. And which to me is saying, you know, okay, guys, the way that you're doing this is wrong. I'm going to show you how it really was supposed to be from the very, very beginning. Yeah. Because I would say there's probably not a woman listening to this podcast who has not been in a position where they've been interacting, say, in a business situation or at a store or something, you know, or buying a car or something like that, where you run into a male salesman who is just a little too patronizing, and you just want to
slap him in the face.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I went to, I took my car in on 3 different occasions for the same problem. And I got told every single time nothing was wrong with my car. And
you should have done the sounds like, well, my car is making this. Dun, 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 dun.
And I'll never forget, I drove it into that service garage and I got out and I said, someone here is going to give me the time of day. I am 19 years old and I am your customer. So someone's going to speak with me and listen to what I have to say. And you're going to get in the car so I can drive you and point out the noise that I'm hearing. And I was like, why? Why did it take...
Why has it taken me 3 times
right.
to...
And I think that, you know, a lot of our decisions as women, when we make them, I think that it's always a good idea to reflect on our motive behind them. Because whether you want to be a mother or you want to be in the work field your entire life, or you want to do both, or you want to do 3 things, or you want to do...
At different
nothing,
seasons, you may do different things.
Exactly. What is your motive? Is your motive for working your entire life 60 hours a week so that you can prove to everyone around you that you're capable? Or is your motive that God has placed a desire on your heart to do that and to go into that
missionary
field
in your work field
and to do that? And is your desire as a feminist, if we want to use that word, to throw shade on men and women who aren't feminists, or is your desire to raise awareness for the way women's roles have been overlooked and the way they're changing? And so I think that when we make these decisions as women, and when we're looking at how other women make these decisions for themselves, what's your motive? And take into account, well, what's their motive? It's not, if I'm a mom staying at home to raise my children and send them out into the world, and I'm looking at someone in the workforce who has a babysitter, is my motive judging them because I've never even questioned their motive, you know? What if they're living out God's design for their life and I'm living out mine? Like, shouldn't that be enough?
Yeah.
And so I think when it comes to looking at other women and evaluating our own lives, you know, what is your motive and where are you coming from?
I mean, what about the other thing when you were talking, Jessica, that occurred to me is the thought of the feeling of competition between men and women. It's almost like it's a competition on who's going to be the better, who's going to win, who's going to be, you know, coming from maybe a more radical kind of feminism kind of thing about, you know, I'm better than you and I'm going to prove it.
Yeah.
And rub your nose in it.
Right.
That kind of thing. And or, you know, men competing with women and just saying, no, you know, you're a woman, sit down and be quiet.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. That's never what it was supposed to be from the very beginning. You know, it was to be a partnership and it was not to be a competition.
Yeah.
And, but I see that. And then, in almost like an inverse way, when you think about, I don't normally watch like regular TV, you know, like sitcoms and different things like that. But for the longest time, men were portrayed as idiots for a long. I mean,
Yeah.
they
I
were
think of like
idiots, buffoons.
Yeah.
Tim the Toolman Taylor. What was
Yeah,
that?
like no clue.
Yeah.
You know, if it wasn't for that woman in the house, everything would just go down the drain. You know, almost like he's like a kid and has to be kept in line and all that. I mean, that's the way the character was played out, and that's not healthy either.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
After my divorce, I remember it was hard for me to, say kind things about men.
Oh, I'm sure.
In general. And until one day, I was so convicted. And I think something had just come out of my mouth. And it was like this thought then came in my head that I know was from God saying, you are raising men. Because I have 2 sons.
Yeah.
You're raising men. You can't be saying things like that. Because you're raising men. They are male. They're going to become men, and you're saying this stuff in front of them. What are you thinking?
Yeah.
And it was like, oh my gosh, that's right. That's so wrong.
Yeah, I've thought that before too. When I've talked to people that have a very feminist outlook on life, almost to the extreme of men suck.
Yeah.
I'm threatened by that because I am too raising 3 males, and I don't have a pushover mindset. Like I'm not going to walk around and let men push me around. I'm going to stand up for myself, but I'm not going to do it in a way that, like, what is it, demasculinizes them,
Right.
To make them feel less about themselves. I think the question that kept surfacing when we've been talking about all of this: what if we celebrated the roles for what they were?
Yeah.
I mean, just strip away all the opinions. What if we celebrated the roles for what they are? I think that that's really uncommon and kind of taboo in our culture, because it's almost as if we were to celebrate the role of males in society, then I think that people would just be afraid that they wouldn't know about the horrible ones. You know what I mean? Like you're making a blanket statement about how, like, if you're going to make a blatant statement about men in general, like you're talking about all of them, but there are plenty of good ones.
Oh yeah.
There are plenty of males that represent a gentle, kind, caring nature, intuitiveness, nurturing. My husband is a very nurturing male. And so instead of focusing on all the things that they do against us, the opposite gender does against us, male or female, what would it look like if we celebrated their characteristics and their personality? And that's what we celebrate, and choose to, now hear me say, I'm not saying to be silent when something is out of whack and not right. I'm not saying that. But we've almost switched over to the other side of where we're just going to nitpick about every little thing and make it a really, 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 really big deal. And I think that some of this falls under knowing and walking through life, knowing that God is sovereign and God is the just judge.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure, like, you walked out of an abusive relationship and you wanted, it was probably easier for you to pinpoint all men being that way, to stereotype them like all men are pigs. All men are just, because you were so done with it. But something in your spirit, and that's God, the Holy Spirit, allowed you to have that moment of, I am raising boys and I'm going to raise them in His image.
Yeah.
Because just as much as females can talk about how we're created in His image, males are too.
That's right.
And there's a lot
That's
of
good.
characters. This is a whole nother, there's a whole nother topic on this about, like God's feminine characteristics, because I think that it's easy because God is referred to in the Bible as He, His, and not she, her. But God still has all of like the nurturing, the characteristics that we would typically define in a woman. God has those too.
Right.
And so I don't know. It just has me thinking, what if we did celebrate it and chose to walk through life discerning when we should say something about the other the opposite sex
Yeah.
in a slanderous way.
I love that.
It takes male and female to be a complete reflection of who God is.
I like-
His
yeah.
image. Adam wasn't complete. Well, it took Eve and Adam, male and female, to reflect the total image of God. But when you take one sex over another and elevate that sex above, like they're more important or they have more of this or less, and they're less of that, that's where we run into the problem. And I think that that's always the tension, because our culture swings back and forth so often of saying, we value this more than we value that.
Yeah.
And I think it's in some ways it's tough, I think, being a man in today's culture.
Yeah.
Because the things that may come more naturally to them in some ways are looked down upon. So it's it's rough. I think it's just rough to be a male in today's culture. It's also not easy being a woman, because then you have this thing of, like we were saying, there may be someone who's called to singleness, and they need to be single, and that's okay. And maybe you should be married, and that's okay too.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot to think about, a lot to wrestle with, and I'm glad that we had this conversation. Two things that I love were said is that, Janice, you had referred to it, that it takes male and female to make a complete being. I mean, or like a complete representation of who God has created just in his image.
Yeah.
And I also loved that Megan, it just slipped my mind what she said. Oh, she said, talking about being humble and asking God.
Yeah, what do you want?
Yeah, and framing and processing through the lens of God's will for us in our life, and being humble to what he presents to us. Because like she said, she was just, gung-ho about, I want to be career driven.
Be a doctor.
Yeah. But she didn't let that become so much of the priority that she missed God speaking to say, I actually want you to have a family. So it was a great conversation, but yeah.
I think so too.
Well, be sure to share with friends. And as always, if you have any insight or questions or anything, feel free to email us at inspired@thex.church.
That's it.
All right. We'll see you next week.
Thanks so much for listening. Our hope is that everyone who hears these episodes, near or far, would know that the invitation at our table is always open. You might not be sitting at this table, but our desire is that you would join in on these conversations. So if you were inspired by today's talks, send us an email at inspired@thex.church. We'd love to hear your thoughts, stories, and questions. And as always, don't forget to rate and review wherever you listen to podcasts.